Thanks again for tuning into Moonshine Gaming. Today we're going to be discussing the top 10 rarest and most expensive Sega Master System games. Now, as per usual, we have a few parameters we're going to be following for this list. We won't be including any case variants or home brews on this list. We will be using North American complete in-box pricing, so what this means is the game case, instruction manual, and game cartridge are going to be included on all the prices for this list. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we've got King's Quest: Quest for the Crown. This is an adventure game that was released in 1989. The game is one of the few Sega Master System titles that was released by a third-party publisher, and also one of the few released exclusively in the United States. It was actually a port of the original King's Quest that was released on the PC and Apple II in 1984. In the game, you take control of Sir Graham, and your mission is to save the kingdom and prove yourself worthy of the crown by recovering 3 mystic treasures: the King's Magic Mirror, the Protective Shield, and the Chest of Gold. This is a very bare-bones port, and I'd say the only improvement over the original is the graphics. Sound and music is very minimal, and what is there is pretty lackluster. Also, the controls are very frustrating. One part of the game that comes to mind is when you encounter the infamous staircase. When you encounter the stairs in the game, you'll quickly find out that if you don't follow the exact contour of the staircase, you'll fall down and die immediately. This makes the stairs the biggest execution hurdle in the entire game. Although this is the first King's Quest game to make its way to console, this is probably a pass for me. Playing the original version is much more enjoyable. This game's worth $136. Next up, we've got Alex Kidd in Shinobi World. This is a side-scrolling action game that was released in 1990. In the game, an evil being known as Hanzo the Dark Ninja escapes after 10,000 years of confinement and kidnaps Alex Kidd's new girlfriend from the planet Shinobi. The powerless Alex Kidd is approached by the ghost of an ancient warrior who explains that the Dark Ninja intends to sacrifice Alex's girlfriend to conquer the world. The spirit of the ancient warrior fuses itself with Alex's body, lending Alex his strength, skills, and courage. Despite being part of the Alex Kidd series, the game mechanics of Shinobi World are quite different from Alex Kidd in Miracle World and are much closer to the Master System version of Shinobi. After the first game, the Alex Kidd series kind of went downhill in my opinion. None of the games featuring Alex seemed to stack up against the original. Luckily, Sega brought back Alex Kidd for this last hurrah and created Shinobi World, and they nailed it. It delivers a fun platforming experience with a catchy soundtrack and colorful cartoony visuals. While the game is great to play, most importantly, it allows Alex Kidd to leave the gaming world with a final, respectable title under his belt. With the recent remake of the game Alex Kidd in Miracle World for current-gen consoles, we can cross our fingers that a remake of Shinobi World isn't too far behind. This game's worth $161. Next up, we've got Ghouls and Ghosts. This is a side-scrolling platform game that was released in 1990. You play as Arthur, whose princess girlfriend is kidnapped by hordes of undead beasts, and it's up to you to rescue her. There's no dialogue in-game except after defeating the final boss, where you're instructed to start from the very beginning and do it all over again. The game was a port of the 1988 arcade game of the same name. Weirdly enough, it was actually ported to the Sega Genesis first in 1989. The Master System version introduced a new power-up system, which allowed the player to enter secret shops and upgrade parts of their armor. The upgrades included new weapons, spells, damage reduction, and movement speed increases. Even though the difficulty had been toned down since the first title, the major problem with Ghouls and Ghosts is that it is extremely difficult. In most hard games, you can simply memorize enemy patterns to get through, but due to the randomness in this game, it's really tough to do that. Enemies will spawn in places that you don't expect, and you'll often find yourself fighting multiple aerial foes as well as enemies on the ground. On a positive note, the graphics in the game are incredible. I'd even go as far as saying it's one of the best looking games on the console. Although it still remains one of the weaker installments of the series, this version is still a great way to experience this classic game. It's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of this series. This game's worth $192. Next up, we've got Phantasy Star. This is an RPG that was released in 1988. Phantasy Star tells the story of Alice on her journey to defeat the evil ruler of her star system, King Lassic, after he killed her brother. She traverses between planets, gathering a party of fighters and collecting the items she needs to avenge her brother's death and return peace to the star system. The graphics are bold and colorful, and the battles look particularly impressive, with a unique first-person perspective and large detailed monster and character sprites. I also really enjoy the soundtrack of this game. The first-person dungeon crawling and manga-style cutscenes were also really well done and fairly progressive for the time of release. One thing to note, which could be considered a downside to some gamers, is the amount of grinding you'll have to do in order to keep up with the aggressive difficulty at the beginning of the game. Don't worry though, the mid and late game make up for this early game grind. Phantasy Star isn't perfect, but the flaws are all pretty minor, making the game easily one of the best 8-bit console role-playing games. The title is well made, well presented, enthralling, and innovative, and it helped pave the way for many amazing RPGs to come. This game's worth $208. Next up, we've got Alf. This is an action-adventure game that was released on New Year's Eve of 1989. The game was the only game based on the Alf TV show and is the second USA-only release on this list. The game isn't very good at all. In fact, it's downright horrible. First off, why are you able to use a piece of salami as a weapon? Secondly, this game gives ET a run for its money with its confusing gameplay. The graphics are pretty horrible as well, including choppy animation and lazy MS Paint looking foregrounds and backgrounds. The music in the game isn't great, but it also isn't horrible. It's actually more tolerable than a few of the other SMS soundtracks. Also, there are no sound effects in the game, which I found kinda weird. The game's controls are surprisingly smooth, except when you're trying to open doors by awkwardly smashing the up and 1 button at the same time. It never seems to work out. I wouldn't say Alf is the worst game on the Sega Master System, but it's definitely bottom of the barrel. I couldn't justify spending any money on this game or even playing it at all. This game's worth $248. I just want to stop and give a quick shout out to you guys, because you guys are awesome and you've helped grow this channel bigger and faster than I ever thought it would be, so thank you guys. And if you want to join the Moonshine community, we put out videos every Thursday, and you can hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with video game content every week. Next up, we've got Power Strike. This is a vertically scrolling shooter that was released in 1988. Sega didn't release Power Strike to the general public. The game was only available to purchase through mail order from Sega's own Master System themed newsletter. This makes the US version extremely uncommon. In the game, an alien presence is ravaging your planet and it's up to you to stop it. The best feature of Power Strike is the multitude of power-ups you can grab. All of the classic power-ups can be found in this shooter, from the wave gun to the giant pulsing energy ball. Each power-up is numbered so you can easily tell what you're about to pick up. This is extremely useful because snagging multiple of the same power-up increases its power. In addition to these major power-ups, you must also keep collecting P capsules, which boost the strength and width of your regular weapon. Power Strike isn't an overly pretty game, and it has some quirks that can make things frustrating. You'll fight the same enemies through all the stages, and the bosses are also a bit on the dull side. But if you strip all that away, you'll have an intense, fast-paced shooter that will test your reflexes and provide a good amount of pulse-pounding action. If you're able to look beyond its flaws, you'll find a worthy shooter that's pretty fun. This game's worth $281. Next up, we've got Spider-Man. This is an action platforming game that was released in 1991. In the game, Kingpin, the villain, has hidden a radioactive bomb on the harbor that's set to detonate within 24 hours. He frames Spider-Man for planting the bomb, and the whole city is on the hunt to arrest Spidey. You take control of Spider-Man, and it's up to you to clear your name and defeat the bad guys. The game's controls are extremely fluid. It controls well, and the different attacks do varying amount of damage. A small downside is that some of the levels can feel really long, and there is an extreme difficulty spike when you get to the power plant level. Aside from this difficulty spike, the game is mechanically one of the best on the Sega Master System. Since the game was released so late in the Master System's life, it's no surprise that the graphics are really solid, with detailed character sprites and colorful backgrounds. The music in the game is nothing to write home about, but it is decent enough. Spider-Man's a solid game through and through. Graphically and gameplay wise, it really shows what the Master System was capable of. If it wasn't for the power plant level, this game would have went down as legendary in my books. Check it out, even if it means following a walkthrough for the power plant level. This game's worth $282. Next up, we've got Golden Axe Warrior. This is an RPG that was released in 1991, and with a very different style of gameplay, it's evident that this is technically a spin-off of the Golden Axe series. In the game, you play as a young warrior who's tasked with destroying the evil tyrant Death Adder and saving the Princess of Firewood. You'll work your way across a large world, fight enemies, seek mysterious labyrinths, fight bosses, and obtain the crystals that are guarded by many monsters. As soon as you start this game, you'll immediately notice the resemblance to the original Legend of Zelda, and it almost comes off as an obvious clone. The graphics are extremely similar, although the expanded color palette makes for a slightly better looking game. You'll fight similar monsters, enter familiar dungeons, and solve the same type of puzzles with some minor tweaks here and there. One of the nice differences from Zelda is the multiple save points hidden around the overworld, in addition to actual towns, inns, shops, and people to talk to, which is a nice step up from all the crazy hermits in Zelda. Even with the similarities to Zelda, this game still ranks as one of the better Master System games, definitely worth playing. This game's worth $382. Next up, we've got Sonic the Hedgehog. This is a side-scrolling platform game that was released in 1991 and was the final game to release for the Sega Master System in North America. This is another instance where the Sega Genesis version was actually released before the Sega Master System version, with the Genesis version coming out in stores just a few months prior. You take control of an anthropomorphic hedgehog named Sonic, and you race through levels to rescue imprisoned animals. The 8-bit version is paced slightly slower than the 16-bit version and focused a bit more on exploration. While some level themes, such as Green Hill Zone, are borrowed from the Genesis game, others are original. It also features a soundtrack which consists of rearranged versions of the tracks from the Genesis game, as well as some new material. Some other noticeable differences are that you're not able to pick up your dropped rings when you take damage, and there aren't any loop-de-loops, psychedelic backgrounds, or crazy spinning effects in bonus stages. The level design in this version is much more straightforward and tame, but equally as fun. This really is one of the best examples of a platformer on the Master System, and is on par with Alex Kidd in Miracle World. Many gamers will have been introduced to Sonic through this game before graduating onto the Genesis version, so for some, it'll certainly bring back some good memories. For other Sonic fans who perhaps didn't even know this version existed, why not take a chance on it? Sure, it's not quite as polished as the Genesis version, but it's a slice of Sonic's history which shouldn't be missed. This game's worth $662. Next up, number 1. James Buster Douglas Knockout Boxing. This is a one-on-one fighting game that was released in 1990. At the beginning of each game, you're asked to choose either a slow speed or a fast speed, although there isn't much of a difference between the two settings, so I'm not sure why that's included. You use the directional pad to move and block. You move using the left and right buttons, and you block your head and protect your stomach by using the up and down buttons. The action is simplistic and it works. Since every fighter has the same reach, each fight becomes a tit-for-tat long-distance battle. You'll find yourself rushing in, recording a punch or two, and then falling back, and you'll continue to repeat these steps over and over until the end of the fight. Side note, even though this game shares its name with its Sega Genesis counterpart, it's actually a completely different game. The game is relatively fun, but it's extremely short. There are only 5 fights in the game's story mode, so you can roll through it fairly quickly once you get the hang of the controls. While it is fun in short spurts, there's just not enough meat in the game to warrant paying the crazy price. This game's worth $1,147. And that's going to do it for the video. Hope you enjoyed the top 10 rarest and most expensive Sega Master System games. We'll see you next time.